Welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole, and today I'm going to be talking to you about historical fiction that has been written by Black authors. And these are going to include books that I've read, as well as books that I want to read. So let's get into these. I think there are some really excellent books in this category, and I'm tempted to even go into some honorable mentions, but I will try and stick with just what I have here. So to start, I'm going to talk about The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. This is such a fascinating book, and I am going to consider it historical fiction, though it's definitely on the side of literary fiction as well. In fact, I had a really hard time deciding on which category to put some of these books in. I ended up sticking with historical fiction for this book because it discusses the Underground Railroad in America, and that is a huge part of our history, and so there you go. This is a book that I read a couple of years ago and I gave it 4 stars, though over the course of the last year or so, I have rethought that and I feel like it probably should have been rated 5 stars because I do continue to think about this book and the messaging in it and even the way it was written. It tells a story of a young woman growing up as a slave on a plantation, goes over a bit of her experience there and then her escape to the north. And this is not what you would typically expect of a straightforward historical fiction. And in that sense, it is on the literary side of it because there is some magical realism that is involved in the Underground Railroad itself. This book isn't so much solely about the Underground Railroad and how it works, but it really does explore more the human experience and a lot of what was going on throughout the US at the time of slavery and at the time the Underground Railroad existed. It explores the complexities that was involved in running away as a slave, as well as those who were or weren't involved, and just the experience of racism and the way race was viewed throughout the US. And I think that was a part of the book that I really think was very important. I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who would like to read about the Underground Railroad, but maybe from a slightly different perspective, anyone who likes magical realism, and particularly people who are just interested in that time period and just what things were like in different parts of the US during that time period. The next book that I'm going to discuss that I have right here is The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. This book was a smash success when it came out, and it was just everywhere. You couldn't escape from it. I bought this book, I think, the month it first came out. It was something that I read in my family book club, and I ended up rating it 4 stars. This is a really fascinating story about a small town in the South. It starts in the 1970s, but then it goes back into time. So there has been a murder potentially committed. A body is found in a well at the beginning of the story. That is largely what the description of this book describes, is sort of this outstanding mystery. I would say this is not a mystery. This is not a crime novel. Don't go into it with that perspective. It is definitely historical fiction, and it discusses a lot more just a life in this small town that is a mix of a couple of different communities. There is a very poor Black community that is on the outside of this town. It is neighboring a community grocery store that is run by a Jewish family, and the rest of the basically white town has moved sort of off in more into the center of town. And it just discusses the different race relations that are going on there, historically, how things were kind of segregated in that area. You get a little bit of the train car porter involvement in there, as well as like institutionalization of people. There are just a whole bunch of historical things that are going on in the US. This story really gets into the relationships and the interconnectedness of this community, whether or not all the members want to be part of it. And you do get some historical background about race relations at that time. This is a good book. I'm not surprised that it was as popular as it became. For me personally, I'm just not a big nonlinear and literary fiction person, so that was why I gave it a 4. But a lot of people really did enjoy this book and were not bothered by the numerous number of characters that come in and out of the book. The last one that I'm going to talk about that is a book I have read is Roots, and this also gets me into the books that I want to read because I do want to reread this book. Roots is by Alex Haley, and as it says on the cover of this one, it's the saga of an American family. This covers the story of an African American family, starting with them being in a tribe in Africa. I think it starts in pre-colonial or during colonial times. Early 1750 is what it says. It follows the story of Kunta Kinte and the six generations of his family that come afterwards, going all the way from their time in Africa to how they came over to America and all of their experiences. Not only is it a very long, thick novel, but it very much gets deep into the weeds of this family, and it is just a fascinating story. It is well written, and you do get very committed and connected to this family. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of, I think it's Homegoing. It's a story that has a similar sort of idea where you follow from family to family generationally as it goes along. If that's not the correct story, I will put the correct one on the screen. But I remember my only complaint with that story being that I didn't feel like we got enough of each generation or set of family members. In Roots, it's like you're going to get way more than enough. So if you liked that story, I would highly recommend this, and I look forward to rereading this myself. So I have three books to share that are all books that I would recommend, even though I haven't read them yet. They're all books that are on my TBR or my to be read list, and I'm looking forward to getting to each and every one of these, starting with Native Son by Richard Wright. I'm pretty sure this is on my 25 books to read in 2025 list, and this book gets into a fictional account of a young man, a young Black man, and his experience going through the criminal justice system as he navigates life after he has accidentally murdered a woman. And I'm still like, how do you accidentally murder someone? But I guess I'll find out when I read it. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. This is both a classic as well as historical fiction because it does take place, I believe, in the 1970s. No, earlier than that. It is set in the 1930s. So it is definitely a work of historical fiction as well as sort of just a modern classic in its own right. I felt I would be remiss if I didn't put something by Zora Neale Hurston on here. I have here Their Eyes Were Watching God, and this is a book that I am really looking forward to. I hear nothing but really good things about this. I read Barracoon by Zora Neale Hurston the year before last, so I guess in 2022, and I was really impressed by her work. She is basically an anthropologist um, and a historian, I would say. Barracoon was a nonfiction work of hers, so I'm looking forward to getting a fiction work of hers going. As it's described, this is a Southern love story told in the captivating voice of a woman who refuses to live in sorrow, bitterness, fear, or foolish romantic dreams. I'm just looking forward to getting to another work by Zora Neale Hurston. She has an amazing eye for detail, and I'm just looking forward to seeing how she takes her anthropological work and knowledge and puts that into a fictional story. And the final work of historical fiction that I have is actually on my TBR list for February, so I will be reading it this month, and that book is The Known World by Edward P. Jones. This is a winner of the Pulitzer Prize and tells the story of a Black man who works a farm, has his own land, and what happens to his wife and family upon his death when he suddenly dies and passes away. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion about land ownership and rights and just the ethics of how Black people who weren't slaves but were living during a time of slavery and just how that may or may not have worked for them. This takes place in Manchester County in Virginia. I used to live in Virginia, and there are historical things all over the place there, so I'm sure this will be very interesting to read as I will probably know some of the areas that it's discussing. So that is all I have to share today. I am sure that I have left a lot out, including books that I own on my shelf and books I have read. If you have books that are works of historical fiction by Black authors that you would like to share, list them in the comments below, and let's just keep this list growing and moving. I'll be interested to see what you've got going on. I hope this, puts some new and interesting books on your list, and I will talk to you next time.